All right, so it's really my pleasure today to introduce Dr. Jared Benge as a board-certified clinical neuropsychologist and associate professor of neurology at Dell Medical School at the University of Texas at Austin. He serves at the UT Austin Comprehensive Memory Center, specializing in the assessment of dementia, Alzheimer's disease, and cognitive impairment and movement disorders. Dr. Benge earned his PhD in clinical psychology with a focus in neuropsychology from the University of Houston, and completed his internship and fellowship at the Michael E. DeBakey VA Medical Center. His research, supported by NIH, Parkinson Foundation, NASA, and the Alzheimer's Association, focuses on technology and cognitive impairment, early detection of cognitive decline, and real-world functioning and neurodegenerative diseases. He is also a dedicated educator and training director of the Adult Clinical Neuropsychology Fellowship. With that, I turn it to Dr. Benge. Please go ahead, and thanks for joining again. Thanks.
Oh, thank you all so much. Thank you for the invitation. So appreciate the opportunity to talk about this work. I find this work interesting. Of course, to me, I'm biased by that, but I think it's also important for a group of people that are interested in stroke outcomes, interested in working to improve real world outcomes, and reach people across broad segments of the population. I think you have to consider technology as a part of that. And so I'm going to kind of walk you through my journey of researching in this field as a clinician here. No disclosures other than my research support. Of course, my views are my own, and I don't represent the state of Texas or my funders for this. The kind of the three broad themes that we're going to cover today is just step back and understand a little bit more about how technology use is changing amongst older adults. And then we're going to look at how that impacts real world functioning. I think any of us who work in a neurology adjacent space or work with outcomes know that things like independence and activities of daily living are hugely important, and kind of everyone's goal is to promote independence. And so we're going to look at that, but we're also going to step back and take a bigger picture view of whether all this tech use is good or bad for the aging brain, and kind of cover some information there as well. So to jump off here, I was taught whenever I was on fellowship that your assessment of a patient always started when you went to pick them up from the waiting room. With the gift of hindsight, I suspect that is because our clinic did not have enough funds to support a medical assistant to room our patient, and so they were just using us to room them. But the point lasted nonetheless, right? The idea that whenever you are going out to the waiting room, you can start to get information. You can look for difficulties with walking. Are they attending when you call their name? All these sorts of variables. But for me, around 2011, 2012 really jumps out in my head as more often than not, when I would go get a patient out of a waiting room, they would have some sort of electronic device with them. They'd have some sort of smartphone, some sort of tablet, some sort of Kindle, some sort of web printout that they had brought with them. This really stuck out to me as kind of when I started noticing this happening in my patients. And so when you look at the Pew Research study, you can see that around that time point, somewhere between 2010 and 2015, older adults, those over the age of 65, they've always lagged behind younger, middle-aged and younger adults in terms of technology usage. But you start to see that graph started rapidly closing. Those lines started converging. All right. Across the population, you start to see that older adults were more and more using this technology, such that in the most recent data from 2024, you're starting to see nearly the same degree of things like internet usage among older adults as you do in younger cohorts. At the same time, over the same time period, I'm not just a researcher and a clinician, I'm also a dad, and I'm a dad to a son who has developmental disabilities, seizures, autism, and intellectual disability. And this is my oldest. You can see him in this picture here when he was about 10. You can see him now that he just turned 18. So he's a very impaired individual cognitively, but you can see that in every picture I have of him, right? What do you see? You see his iPhone or his iPad with him, right? So in this individual who has always been in self-contained behavior classrooms, really has struggled with any sort of kind of traditional schooling, has never been in mainstream education, he can utilize his iPad devices. These devices have somehow become windows that even someone who has significant cognitive impairment can use them meaningfully. And these ideas got into my head as I started working with more and more patients and seeing that technology was a part of their day-to-day lives. And as I came home and worked with my family and worked with my son and saw how he was utilizing technology, you can tell as a neuropsychologist, these ideas were sticky, and I had a hard time shaking these ideas, right? Uh, just to put so as you dig deeper here, right? I think one of the most profound influences in our older adult samples is the high penetrance of smartphones, right? I think a lot of this is driven by the market. It's really hard to buy a dumb phone now, but you can see from the Pew data in 2023, amongst older adults, we're now seeing 3 out of 4 older adults with a smartphone. And I think this has been like a Trojan horse in terms of getting digital technologies into the day-to-day lives of older adults. You can see similar patterns emerge with home broadband use, but you'll notice that older adults lag behind home internet use overall. But you're starting to see this interesting pattern where an increasing number of older adults are smartphone dependent, meaning they don't pay for home internet access. They just use the internet access that's on their phone. So the phone becomes their one their one kind of entry point into the internet here. And I think this is an important point that we'll revisit in a second. But the smartphones have sometimes become the only digital portal for some of our older adults, especially those that have socioeconomic disadvantages. Um, that being said, there is still a digital divide amongst older adults, but my read of the literature here is that it's less and less a matter of like having access to the internet in some form or fashion, but it becomes a difference in using technologies to help with real world things. So a great example, again, I'm a neuropsychologist, so I'm interested in memory disorders, these sorts of things. So let's think about using passwords, right? Remembering passwords is something that's very challenging. I think we all struggle with all the passwords we have to do. But when you look at like how older adults manage their passwords, right? The older adults who are most likely, again, to have memory problems are the least likely to use like password managers that would actually make their lives easier. They're still writing down passwords, or they just repeatedly reset their passwords, right? So you can see that even though older adults may be having their devices, they may not be using them in the same way that kind of younger cohorts are for things that may matter to us from a cognitive standpoint. Okay. You can also see kind of similar differences in pattern, like podcasts. This is something that I think a lot of us, particularly those of us who have college educations, frequently use podcasts, but you can see these interactions between age and education may mean that some things like podcasts are not used as commonly. You can see that social media use patterns differ. So older adults are more likely to be Facebook users and YouTube users as opposed to kind of the other social media platforms. This becomes very important when you're trying to promote for studies and get people to enroll. You want to go where your target audience is. But again, you're getting this feel that even if access to technology and the internet is increasing, the ways with which older adults are using them may be different than middle-aged and younger users. Okay, so that being said, if we have all of these digital tools, and if they're increasingly a part of my patients' lives, if they're increasingly usable, even for people that are experiencing cognitive impairment, the thread that I, as a clinician and as a clinical researcher, started pulling, kind of the thing that most of my CV is kind of filled with things that I found itchy. And so this was the first itch I wanted to scratch, was how can we start teaching older adults how to use their technology to function better, longer, and more independently? And so myself and my colleague at Baylor University, Michael Scullin, we started with prospective memory as one potential way that this could be helpful. So as a brief primer, I'm not sure how familiar y'all are with these different cognitive constructs, but there's a lot of different forms of memory. Prospective memory refers to remembering to remember. So remembering an upcoming event. So like the next time I'm at the store, I need to get milk. On Thursday, I need to call my doctor. Every month, my water bill is the only one not on auto pay. Let's make sure I write the check. So these prospective memory impairments are very common with age, very common with Alzheimer's disease and related disorders. That's what ADRD stands for. So when you look at all the different types of memory impairments out there, this difficulty remembering to remember is usually one of the most functionally limiting aspects of cognitive decline with age. In other words, no one really cares if you remember what happened yesterday for dinner, but if you forget to take your meds tomorrow, or you forget your doctor's appointment, or you forget to pay your bill and your water gets cut off, those become very functionally limiting in a hurry here. Okay, so prospective memory felt like a good thing to try to tackle first. So when you're thinking about trying to help people with prospective memory, there's a lot of different strategies you can help, right? So you can like train them to use a strategy, visualize an upcoming event, or do computerized games to drill and kill this skill, right? But when you look at this meta-analysis that we did of the studies that were out there, external memory aids, getting things out of your head and into a system, tends to have the strongest effect size, tends to be not only tends to have the strongest effect size, but tends to be the most related to real world measurable outcomes. Okay, so in our initial trial here, what we did was that we looked for, we did a randomized controlled trial between two conditions. One of them is we took trained individuals to use the Cortana app. So back in the day, Microsoft had Cortana as kind of their smart assistant. And so we were teaching older adults with mild cognitive impairment and mild dementia to use the Cortana app for these upcoming events, these prospective memory tasks. In another condition, we taught them how to use their smartphone just to use the voice recorder on their phone. So they would do what's called an implementation intention condition. They would record themselves the task that they want to do. So they kind of use it as like a digital form of a notebook here. And this was a blinded study, and we gave these kind of co-endpoints here, where we had a goal attainment scaling. At the beginning of the study, older adults identified prospective memory tasks in their own lives that they would like to do better at. But then we also gave them objective homework assignments. And so what we used was gave them random times and dates that they needed to call and leave a voicemail on the lab phone, so that we could actually see, do they make the call? Does it come at the time we want it to? That gives us more kind of objective evidence that they were able to do things in the real world with these strategies. We published this in JAGS a couple years back here. So you can see that we had a group of individuals, kind of mid-70s. These were all individuals who had about 1.5 standard deviations below the mean for their cognitive status. A fair bit of them already had a smartphone, though about a quarter of the group, we had to give a smartphone to them. Okay. And what we saw was that you can train older adults to use these digital devices to help with prospective memory. It's a little faster to train someone to use a simple voice recorder app as opposed to the reminder app. There were, but they were able to use it. We were able to take people even up to mild dementia, and they were able to use the technique on over 80% of the day. While there was initially some kind of trepidation from people, exposing them to the phone actually increases their likelihood they would recommend this to a friend. So despite a lot of these kind of stereotypes you might have that an older adult might not want to use a phone or find it too overwhelming, with a little bit of coaching, a lot of those issues can be gotten past here. And what we saw, right, was that we met our initial feasibility goal, and we're able to show that these interventions work. That even just we just did one-time training and then kind of sent them loose in the world to do different tasks. We can see that both groups both subjectively reported improved prospective memory, but also saw an increase in objective performance with actually making these calls on the days and times they were assigned. You can see that the effect starts to drop off over the weeks. Again, this was a one-time training with forgetful people, but you can also see that it starts to plateau over time. And so there is some impact here in terms of potential effect. On top of that, engaging with these technologies was associated with improvements in quality of life, better post-intervention activities of daily living, right? So we're starting to see more evidence that these brief interventions with technology hold some promise here. So of course, there remain questions about this, though. So do these gains persist over long periods of time, particularly that drop off that you see after that kind of first week of use? These were also two active digital conditions. And so one question we frequently got was, would a paper-based calendar do better? Would that be easier? And for who would that be better? We also had questions about caregivers, right? Do caregivers benefit from us training patients? If we take information, give the patient a system that they can trust, does that get things off the to-do list of the caregiver? What about people that come in with digital disadvantages? Maybe they weren't as familiar with the internet or they didn't have a smartphone. Would these tools still work for them? So we had initial data, but we didn't have answers to a lot of these questions. So that led to our next study, which we're doing right now. So this was an R01 that's funded by NIH. We're in our second year of this trial. We've got 200, we're aiming for 200 MCI or mild dementia patient caregiver groups to go here. And I'm calling this the battle royale between Google Calendar and paper-based calendar. So we're randomly assigning people into these two conditions. One is a paper-based calendar, the memory support system, which is used in the Mayo Clinic MCI groups. The other is we're training people to use Google Calendar on their phone and use their photo app as a digital journal. And so we're looking now at 6-month outcomes. We're training them at baseline, but then we're giving booster sessions over Zoom for the first month to try to increase adherence over time. We're measuring not just patient outcomes, but also caregiver outcomes. We are because we're very interested in when you help the patient, do you help the caregiver as well? Which helps better? And we're trying to oversample people who are coming from digitally disadvantaged backgrounds. So individuals who have prior technological limitations, individuals that may be underrepresented in ADRD research and technology research. And we're very interested in getting not just the quantitative data, but this is really a mixed methods approach where we're doing interviews at the end to try to get at the qualitative features and the impact of digital disadvantage on the efficacy efficacy of both paper versus smartphone groups. So I know we've got some people in the room who are in Austin. If you're working with any older adults who have MCI or mild dementia, if you want to send them our way, we'd be glad to have them. My research coordinator would be glad to screen them. And if you know any places we can reach out to people, we'd love to hear that too. But with this thread of our research, kind of our ultimate goal is to develop, easy to implement real world treatments. I'm as much as I love measuring cognition, at the end of the day, I want to help real people with real brains in the real world with real problems. You'll hear that over and over again as I talk today. And I suspect that we might need to match the right tool to the right person at the right time in their disease course. I think this is going to end up being critical to really find these strategies that help. So I'll spend the rest of my career trying to figure this problem out, but I hope to recruit more people to help me figure it out along the way. So that was kind of the first thread. Jared in clinic, Jared as a dad, watching his sons learn technology, doing this randomized controlled trial, looking at prospective memory, right? This was my entree into this world. But along with this, all right, other questions started emerging here. So I don't know kind of where everyone's at on their career trajectory on this call. I know we have at least some professors. I imagine we have some students in here as well. So one of the things you'll learn about working in academia and doing grants is that if you write grants, you will get rejected a lot. You get very comfortable with rejection. And if you don't, please come work for us because I'd love someone with the magic touch for grants here. But our first R21 rejection, one of the quotes from reviewer 2, and for me, it's always reviewer 2 that seems to have a problem with me. I'm always very sad when I'm reviewer 2 on a grant. So they wrote this: many individuals, especially those who are older or with conditions maybe more easily intimidated by technologies like smartphones, leading to poor compliance, adaptability in using technology. They rejected it. They said it's just not feasible. Older adults don't use technology. They're not going to use it in the real world. And that was what they said. All right. So what do you do as a researcher? Well, usually as a researcher, you get mad, right? And then you go get data. And if you're mad enough about it, you eventually go and write a paper about it. And so this reviewer really got us thinking about, are we capturing what we're seeing in clinic? It's one thing for Jared to say, yeah, when I go out to the waiting room, all my patients are using smartphones. It's happening. It's another thing to convince a reviewer they need data. So I started this paper. We got that rejection like 2017. So we whipped up an IRB, got a survey out in our clinic, literally walking out in the waiting room, giving patient surveys. And we were seeing that even back then in 2017, we were seeing that, within our patients, we were everyday cognitive features and general features of the phones were being used in a subset already, right? But we started thinking about this more and more. If you don't measure technology use in a patient population of interest or in your study more generally, then you don't really have an empirical leg to stand on to say whether it helps, whether it hurts, anything like that. And a lot of our tools don't accurately capture technology uses, as particularly technology as an activity of daily living, right? So when you look at some of the scales that are still very commonly used, right? So the Lawton and Brody is one of these kind of classic aging activity of daily living scales used in stroke research, used in a lot of different research groups here. But the Lawton and Brody was made in 1969. All right. So when you look at the individual items, I put a couple of them up here. It has questions like dialing a few well-known numbers, right? Looks up phone numbers. Some of our other measures talk about looking things up in a phone book. I've not seen a phone book in like a decade. Look at things like writing checks. Again, I don't know when the last time I wrote a check was. So you can see that some of these scales of daily activities that are used in aging, neurodegenerative disease, stroke, just have not kept up with changes in technology. So again, we go out to the community. This data is derived from the Georgetown Neuroscience Foundation up here where I live in Georgetown, Texas. We had 350 older adults, kind of report on their overall technology use for daily tasks. And what I'll draw your attention to is to the right, the figure on the left. As you go to the right, these are more digital uses for daily activities. To the left is more paper-based, more analog things. And you see that most day-to-day tasks are increasingly, in this sample of people that the average age was 70 something, they report that their reliance is more on digital than it is on paper-based for, using GPS to navigate as opposed to paper maps, or using bills on auto pay, checking accounts online. And despite what you might think, the actual trends in the data would suggest that those that are more digitally native report that they're highly satisfied with their approach and feel that they make fewer errors, right? Of course, during the pandemic as well, we looked at some of the changes of how the pandemic changed older adults' usage of technology. And what we saw was that things like ordering online, attending meetings and events with kind of video teleconferencing things, these sorts of activities increased during the pandemic. And the pandemic kind of was something that older adults planned on continuing to use these skills after the pandemic ended. We continue to collect data on this. So this is data I collected in 2023 from our clinic here at UT. This, again, is looking at individuals within a clinical setting, and we can see high rates of technology uses kind of across different activities of daily living. So this tech use is something that when you measure it, it's really kind of eye-opening how often it happens, and despite some kind of persistent stereotypes, is frequently something that can help people get real things done. Another sample, this has Houston data in it too, so shout out to the Houston crowd, but we'll skip this one. I like this paper, so I'll highlight just one thing real quick. When you look at this, it's busy. Don't get too focused on seeing anything other than the colors, right? So green are individuals who report that they only use paper-based or analog systems for these daily tasks. And we've got a younger group of adults and an older group of adults. Other than older adults saying they just take the prescription straight from the bottle and they still love a to-do list, you can see how small the green is. Yellow, which is people that use both a digital and a paper-based approach, or blue, which is pure digital, is increasingly becoming the norm. And even if the generation currently doesn't use it, our next generation of people that will age into the range where neurodegenerative diseases come about, or where strokes occur, are going to be digital natives. And we need to adjust to their digital way of life to really understand and improve real world outcomes. And I'll also highlight that we're not done. It's not like tech is done. We produced a smartphone and now we're everything's going to be there, right? So technology is likely to continue to evolve as well. And for those of us that are in neurological spaces, this has a lot of implications for rehabilitation, adaptive design, all of these sorts of things, right? So, for example, self-driving features on cars, I think that's going to become more and more of a thing. So when do you tell someone who had a stroke or who had a TBI or has a neurodegenerative disorder, when you tell them not to drive? What does it mean if they're still driving, but the car is doing most of the work for them? What about when we all have AI assistants like, to help manage appointments, give reminders? Is someone independent day to day? Are they leaning more on that? How can we utilize wearable monitoring so that people can stay at home longer, even if they have a condition that impairs cognition? We're just not done in this space. And so the rate of change in our measurement and our assessment lags well behind what I think the real world lived experience is and is going to be as we move future here. So kind of to summarize this long arc that reviewer two way back in the day kind of brought into my world. Measuring day-to-day activities is critical to Alzheimer's, but I'll also argue for stroke and other neurological and aging research. Independence and real-world functioning is key. Existing measures of these things were created a long time ago, well before the digital revolution. They're still being used, right? So we don't ever want to throw data out, but there's clearly a need to capture this important sphere of functioning. And so our group's been taking two ways forward to tackle this problem here. Okay, so part one, and this is usually when I give a talk where everyone's eyes kind of glaze over. You can save this part of the video. It's better than trazodone for sleep, but it's basic measurement science. All right. We don't need to have instruments that are just published in 1968 and never get updated. We can make adaptive responses through something called item response theory. So if you've ever taken the GRE, the SAT, the MCAT, you know that these new measures of that are used in educational settings have big item banks. And no two people take the same test. In other words, the scales kind of go through and they select items of different difficulty and they use those to narrow in on a skill. We've been using these for several decades for these modern educational tests, but this has been very slow to come to clinic. The NIH has started investing money in this with the NIH Toolbox and NeuroQOL, and I highly recommend you look at those measures because they are adaptive and very useful. But this has been slow to come to clinic. So we're actually utilizing some of these approaches to try to revamp that Lawton and Brody scale from 1968. So we're starting with caregiver interviews where we're actually going over the existing instrument and we're doing qualitative mixed methods approaches to understand kind of how these items are working for those that are caring for people with neurodegenerative disorders. We're looking at things like how can we clarify the items? How is technology impacting this? How are contextual factors in your life or your culture influencing the applicability of this item? And then we're using a large database, the Texas Alzheimer's Research Clinical Care Consortium database, and we're actually matching. We're using this IRT approach to create new items and then link and equate these new items into the existing data that's out there so that these large longitudinal studies don't have to get rid of their existing instrument, but they can use an updated item set to capture day-to-day technology and technologies and activity of daily living. I'll go through this just briefly, but when we've started doing some pilot work on this, thanks to a grant from the Alzheimer's Association, we actually see that in adding technology into ADL measures improves our diagnostic accuracy and the amount of information that we have. Again, if you're in the Austin area and you work with any care partners who may want to give us their insights, again, feel free to get in touch. We would love to talk to them here. So better instruments is one path to get at this problem. But the other path we're taking is that if daily life is just digital, just use the digital techniques to measure the real world. All right. And so this is our Texans App project, funded by the NIH. And this is with collaboration with our friends in computer science and engineering over on main campus there. And what we're interested in is passive activity measurement. So your smartphone gives you a lot of information. If you, not only you've probably seen this, like it knows your steps, but because it's measuring your steps, it also tells you gait asymmetry, those things. All that data is sitting there, you just don't see it. It knows how many times you pick it up. It knows how fast you're typing. It knows how often autocorrect kicks in to correct a spelling error. It knows how socially connected you are, right? If you have a watch, it has these cardiovascular risk factors. So this is all passive activity data that your phone knows about you, but it just sits there on the phone. So we've developed an app called the Texans app, which allows us to take this information and kind of feed it to the cloud. And we're doing cognitive assessments of older adults at baseline, 6 months, 1 year. We're taking individuals who do and don't have cognitive impairment, and we're trying to understand how these passive features, right? Not playing a game on the app or anything like that, but just what the phone is detecting in terms of your daily rhythms, balance, these sorts of things, how that can predict your cognitive state. And this study's winding down, so we're starting to look at the data. We have a couple manuscripts under review. The data is fascinating and gives me infinite hope for this. But we're starting to see things like how speed of typing, right? So the number of words per minute, the time that fingers stay on the keyboard between letters, how things like gait asymmetry is balanced by the pedometer that's on the phone, how these things actually can separate out individuals, older adults who do and don't have cognitive impairment. In our future ways, we've been doing cross-sectional comparisons. We're next going to start looking at the longitudinal, the prediction, to try to identify those passive variables that best predict future states, people who are cognitively declining further. Last year of the study, you don't have to recruit for this one, though we'd love to talk to anybody who's interested. Okay, so zooming back here, these kind of three broad themes. Technology is used in day-to-day life, and I think we can use this to develop kind of cognitive prosthetics to help older adults, right? Along with that, though, technology is a big part of real-world functioning for older adults. We need to use this both to understand real minds in the real world, but we also need to update our instruments to capture that better. All right, and this is where I may be getting myself into hot water here, but this is a question that keeps coming up from reviewers and from audiences when I talk about this. Is like, all right, I get it, tech's important, but is doing all this tech stuff, is it actually good for the brain? Is it good for the brain of the older adults, right? So we're rapidly, the window on answering this question definitively is rapidly closing, right? Because let's imagine someone who's born in 1945, so right after World War II, right? And imagine their world at age 20 versus age 75, right? So you're 20 years old, that would put you at like 1965. You're paying things with paper checks, coins, paper money, right? Now, right, you're using credit cards, Amazon Buy It Now, right? If you wanted information, you go to library, search through a card catalog or read an encyclopedia. Now you Google it, right? Or increasingly just chat GPT it. If you want to remember something, maybe you're relying on your own memory or a paper calendar versus now I have gotten like 19 notifications in the background here of appointments I have coming up here, right? Navigation figured out with paper maps or talking to people versus GPS and everything these days. If you're communicating with someone far away, you send them a letter, a couple weeks later you get a letter back, versus now we're texting, we're emailing, we can video chat. You know, I've never met y'all, and here I am giving a talk about it from my room where the treadmill is. So this is an amazing cognitive shift that our current generation of these digital pioneers. They were the first generation to navigate this shift. They were the first generation to have a childhood that didn't have a lot of technology and then get the full force of technology as they got into their occupational settings and now that they require. So what is the cognitive impact of such a dramatic and sustained change in our cognitive landscape? Okay. So I think you look at that and there are kind of two hypotheses that you can have. So one of them is what is frequently termed like a digital dementia hypothesis, although increasingly the word brain rot gets thrown around, and that doesn't bother a neuropsychologist at all. That the term brain rot was like the word of the year. But I think we all kind of conceptually, this is not like a DSM diagnosis, we all kind of conceptually can think of what this entails, right? So passive screen time, right? Like, so we're just kind of vegging out, and so that's going to make our brain weaker. There's disuse of memory systems. I used to have to remember phone numbers, but now I just touch a contact in my phone. So maybe my working memory and my attention span is getting used less, use it or lose it kind of phenomena. Distractions, right? Distractions all the time, distractions while you're doing complex things, right? So there's a kind of digital dementia hypothesis that in different forms lingers out there. But then you have people like me that are saying, well, maybe there's like this technological reserve hypothesis. Maybe there's some benefit from technology here, right? So you think about tech can facilitate cognitive complexity. I think we would suspect that searching the internet for information, even though it's in front of a screen, is probably more cognitively complex than just passively consuming a video. All right, so there's a complexity component. Tech may be able to facilitate connectedness, right? So as social interactions increasingly move online, an older adult who is able to navigate that digital transition can, send text messages to family members or the grandkids or things like that, or check in with people from back home on social media. There's some debate to be had about whether online mediated interactions are as good as face-to-face. But if the option is you never get to see these people because they don't live right in front of you, so if you can't text them or check in on their Facebook page, if the option is some connection versus none, might the connectedness aspect of technology have some benefit? And then, like we've talked about, tech as a compensatory device. It may be that if you're able to automate tasks, you feel more independent day to day. You're able to function more independently, even in the face of cognitive decline. So you can kind of see these two competing hypotheses about how technology may impact this group of digital pioneers here. Okay, so to the literature we go, right? I didn't have a good answer to that question, from whether it was from reviewers or my audiences when I give talks. So went to the literature here, and what we were specifically after was everyday spontaneous technology use. So I'm not going there talking about a specific brain game or an app training. You're not going to sucker me into wading into that conversation. I'm looking at like real world technology, searching the web, using a smartphone, doing email, this sort of thing. Right? These are the sorts of day-to-day things we're looking at. And we were looking at these kind of cohort studies as opposed to experimental trials, which can have a lot more nuance, but usually a lot more short time periods that they're looking at people. And so we looked at 136 studies, 57 of them were compatible with meta-analyses. We had to kind of clunk together our outcomes, but of that, we had a sample of 411,000 people, kind of in the late 60s on average for their age around the world. This paper just got published this year in Nature Human Behavior. And what we saw, again, busy slide, but what you can see is that across these studies, older adults who were engaging with technology actually showed decreased risk of a diagnosis of a cognitive problem or of having having worse cognition on cognitive measures. There were only a handful of studies where the error bars even crossed into the opposite way. So we didn't see, yeah, and you hear that, and y'all are a good group of researchers, and you're like, yeah, but, right, what about things like the group that were using technologies may have higher education, higher socioeconomic status, higher baseline functioning. These are correlational studies, not causal studies, right? So we agree, right? But even when you go in and you look for the studies that maximally adjusted for those factors, the same pattern emerged. You really did not see any evidence of this kind of widespread digital dementia or like worse cognitive outcomes occurring in older adults who were engaging with technologies. So at least for these digital pioneers, right, this kind of first 30 to 40 years of the digital revolution, we can't find evidence of like this widespread digital dementia. And there's decent evidence to suggest that the kind of the sum total of the impacts might be positive from a cognitive health standpoint, at least compared to non-adopters. To be clear, I don't know if that applies to my generation, kind of this early adoption. I turned 45 next month, so I remember vividly when my buddy down the street got AOL and we jumped on for the first time when I was like 12. So I don't know if that applies to me. I don't know if that'll apply to my children who are digital natives, right, and grew up with phones and the internet everywhere. So we don't know if this will hold for future generations, but it does give us evidence that there may be something that we can play with for a cognitive benefit from technology use. And so we're kind of pulling that thread currently. We're looking at some other ways to leverage some existing cohort data to help us unpack this a little better. I think ultimately, I don't think that there's a universal good or bad when it comes to technology use in cognitive health, but I think there is a call to action to find the things that may be good and avoid the things that may be bad, and being able to scientifically measure the difference would be very important. And then I also really think that we need to find and actually build technologies that are adaptive to users, including users who have cognitive impairment. And so this may be rolling this out, before people get neurodegenerative diseases or strokes, and maybe leveraging those habits after they have one of these conditions, but also having technologies that are truly smart, that are able to adapt to the user and make themselves more useful, regardless of sensory, motor, or other status. So ultimately, this is what our group is looking at, this idea of technological reserve. Can we find technologies that may help prevent cognitive decline? If someone develops cognitive decline, can we keep them functioning better and in their preferred environment? And then, can we find things that help individuals who are caregive better for those with neurological disorders? We kind of produced our theoretical framework in a recent paper in Alzheimer's and dementia, but this idea that we can build technology that cares, technology that helps enhance care for real people in the real world. That's what we want to do. So that's my life crammed into 50 minutes here. Of course, all research stuff can't be done without the support of just so many people. Great support across Central Texas and my collaborators, and happy to get in touch, happy to hear more. And I tried to leave us a few minutes if there were any questions.
Okay, I'll go first if nobody will. Thank you so much. Absolutely love this talk. I'm Sean Savitz here in Houston. I think, it was interesting, I thought when you were talking about the two hypotheses, I'm definitely in the first category. And
Yeah.
It just seems to me, and this may be bad news for me because you're finding the opposite of what I thought, that I'm starting to go into my early stages already. But it just seems like, I mean, the reliance, for example, on my contacts. I have 5,000 contacts now on my phone since I started and I got a phone. And so, I mean, I don't have a Rolodex. I don't have the things that my grandparents had. And it does seem to me they had a far better retrieval system and being able to find somebody than I can. Without that phone and those contacts, I'm screwed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, so anyways, but what I wanted to ask you was, so where's the future with regards to prescriptive interventions for our patients? So I'm seeing patients all the time in the clinic. Many of us who started in stroke are now seeing patients before they've had a stroke because they already have white matter, hyperintensities, cerebrovascular injury. They're already showing some early stages. And they're all asking about, okay, well, should I do games or, so I'm wondering, where are we going? Engage as much as you can, do whatever you want that you're comfortable with. But I'm hoping we can have some more evidence and structure to all of this.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let me great questions, and let me let me break this down into two chunks. So first of all, I think your first point definitely resonates in terms of like these are very real differences in how we use our cognition, right? So I don't think. I think I've always threatened to write a book called Adaptable, right? And we would just talk about how the human brain, its greatest skill is the ability to adapt to environments, right? So a brain can live in the Arctic, and it can live in a jungle. It can adapt to highly urban areas or very rural areas. The brain is very adaptive, and so what I think is fascinating about the role of technology and adaptability is I do suspect that like the ability to remember a specific numeric sequence probably is weaker in me than it may have been in my grandparent whenever I was that age. But I also suspect that my ability to juggle or handle multiple competing inputs is probably better than what that would have been. So it's almost like this, and I want to test this out. Again, this is just Jared Thunken, and I don't have a ton of data to back that up, but I'm working on it. The idea that what we see is that our neural networks adapt to these different stimuli to engage less effortlessly with some tasks more than others. There's this great study by Small in 2009 that kind of showed this, like net naive versus net savvy older adults had different fMRI activations during simulated Google searches versus reading tasks. And so we talked to like 3 years. We're collecting data on this. So I'll hopefully have a pretty slide to back you up. So it's not that it's not happening. I just think it's a net adaptation that may be positive, at least the way you measure it now. Insert asterisks there. I think your flip side, yeah, I think all of us in the neuro world are going to be preventative. I hope to get out of the business of diagnosing. I'd love to see people decades before and start trying to change things then. So what can we tell people right now? So we don't have gold standard evidence of any particular digital intervention that's going to for sure do what it may say on the tin. All right. Matter of fact, the FTC had some strong words for certain companies about some of the claims that they were making on this thing. But here's my general guidance. What we do know is that change with cognition is going to happen as you age, whether or not you have a big stroke or get a neurodegenerative disease. So develop a habit. We know that procedural memory is going to last longer than episodic memory. Build habits now that will serve you even if you have something that takes you out then, right? So get it out of your head and into a system, have a calendar that you trust or a notebook that you trust, have a system that you can use now and that you use well, you'll feel more confident. You'll develop the muscle memory to kind of use those things. And so that even if something happens, you've already got your toolbox with tools in it. All right. We also know that some things are protective. Some things are helpful. Physical exercise is important. Social activity is important. Things that make you stretch mentally is important. So when you're auditing your technology use in the real world, are you using tech to do those things we know help, right? Are you trying to increase your step count a little bit at a time, right? Are you reaching out to friends? You know, when's the last time you've gone through your 5,000 contacts and found people that you should reestablish that relationship with, right? Are you just mindlessly consuming kind of passive activity, or are you out searching for new information about brain health and heart health and all those things, right? And so I think there probably is a way for patients, or I counsel people to audit their technology life through the lens of what we do know helps for brain health and see how tech may facilitate that. So that's my cop-out answer, again, in lieu of better gold standard evidence.
So I think like I don't know if this is a naive question, but like you know the cognitive reserve. So I don't know how that cognitive reserve overlap with technology reserve. And in other words, also there's any biological associations, you know, if you look at the brain images in terms of cognitive reserve and technology reserve in all these, you know, images.
So we are, so thank you, reviewer 3. That was nicer than reviewer 2 tends to be for me. So I'll call you reviewer 3. So yeah, this is exactly it. So we are launching a study in the fall. We just got our IRB approval yesterday. Yay! So we're launching a project called UT Brain Fit, which is building resilience through activity intervention and neurogaming. And we're actually going to be looking specifically at that. We have several different components to this, but the component I'm on is where we're actually going to watch individuals do these activity snacks. And so in particular, we're going to have them do a face-to-face conversation. We're going to have them do some time on a recumbent bike. We're going to have them sit and watch a video, you know, passively. So we have those things. But then we're also going to have them do internet-guided searches, AI-guided searches, and do some other kind of gaming-specific things. And we're actually going to look at how network-level activation changes during each one of these tasks. What we're interested in is, while I think conceptually technology use may be a distinct factor in reserve, or at least in regression models, it exists. It's sometimes statistically independent of other sources of contributors to cognitive reserve. My suspicion is that there is going to be kind of network level differences, maybe even within technology. So you could see that like social salience networks may be more active with AI than they would be with like just a regular Google search, right? We're starting to see little inklings that the brain reacts differently to various technologies. I haven't seen good data in older adults in particular, and so that's kind of guided us to look. And so the ultimate goal is to say, hey, does the brain respond differently to technology as opposed to these other cognitive reserve factors? Is it a distinct entity, or is it just building upon these kind of same resources? So again, talk to me in 3 or 4 years and I'll have not an answer, but more interesting data.
Yeah, we'll have you presenting here again. So.
That's right. That's right. Well, thank you all very much. And good to know that group that was right down the street from us, that the Houston sign is not just a UT Austin sign that got put on the wrong building. I'm glad to know some of y'all are here. So,
Hey, I was just gonna say that device behind you looks like maybe it's a brain health device.
that is my wife's treadmill. I run outside. I tell her that my doing a lot of work but going nowhere is too much like my academic career for that to be a hobby. So that's hers, but she shares it with me.
Fantastic.
Y'all are awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.